What should we be looking for in the season finale on Sunday at Atlanta? Has Dan Morgan given the fan base hope heading into the offseason? And could this year in Canton be the best day in Panthers history? I'll answer those weekly Wednesday mailbag questions right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council. We're beginning next Friday. The weekly Friday mailbag is back. So long farewell to the weekly Wednesday mailbag, as throughout the offseason, I'll be here on Fridays answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions in for the weekly Friday mailbag here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Happy New Year to all of the Locked On Panther viewers and listeners out there. Hopefully you had a safe and prosperous New Year's Eve, and you're feeling good today, as I'm going to answer some of your mailbag questions, and we're going to talk about the final week of the 2024 regular season for the Carolina Panthers. And yes, I know it is 2025, but still counts as the 2024 season. And we'll start off with Jake, as Carolina's heading down I-85 south, about 3.5, usually like 4.5 hour drive because of all the construction there on I-85, which always reminds me of Matt Rule saying once upon a time in Spartanburg at Wofford College during training camp, we're like I-85, we're under construction. Matt didn't realize what he was saying, as I-85 has been under construction my entire life. And I am just waiting for the day when I drive through the upstate of South Carolina, and I know plenty of y'all feel the same way, where it's smooth sailing and it's not the constant construction, but that is a pipe dream. It's been 31 years, nearly 32 coming up here in March, where it's always been under construction. But the Carolina Panthers won't have to necessarily drive. They'll fly down to Atlanta. They'll avoid all of that, and they'll play against the Atlanta Falcons, who need to beat Carolina, then need New Orleans to upset the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think Tampa's probably going to take care of business at home, and hopefully Carolina can take care of business on the road and bounce back in this Week 18 matchup. And Jake is asking, despite the result of Week 17 being, or Week 18 rather, being inconsequential for everything apart from draft order, what are you going to be looking for? He said, obviously another good Bryce Young performance, but I personally want to see the O-line bounce back after their worst performance of the year against Tampa Bay. And speaking of the Panthers offensive line, it has been one of the better units in the league all year long, as far as looking at PFF pass blocking stats, looking at just the amount of sacks that they have allowed, and understand that sacks are not purely an offensive line stat. Quarterbacks are responsible for those as well. Bryce Young's been sacked 29 times. Not every single one of them have been on the offensive line. Andy Dalton was sacked 7 times. Not every single one of them was on the offensive line. Quarterbacks got to make the right read, get the ball out on time, and get rid of it when they need to. So it's not always on the O-line, but understanding this, over the last 3 games against Dallas, Arizona, and against Tampa, Carolina has allowed 14 sacks. That is 14 of the 36 sacks they've given up this season. So just over a third of the sack production for their opponents has come in these last 3 games. This has been a solid offensive line, but they did struggle in that second half, giving up those 6 sacks against Dallas in a lot of obvious passing situations, and understanding that the turnovers from Bryce Young being down, that did not put Carolina in the best position to be able to avoid what is going to be a good pass rush moving forward there in Dallas. Micah Parsons, one of the best in the league, and Ziggy Zua also just ate the lunch of the interior that day in Carolina, like Damian Lewis immediately to start the half, just getting completely destroyed, and that led to a turnover. So they did not play well in that game. Didn't necessarily play well on Sunday, where again they were stuck in obvious passing situations. That's what happens when you do not get off the field defensively in the first half until the very end, then don't get off the field at all in the second half. So yeah, I would like to see the offensive line perform better. I do think we're going to have a discourse this offseason, as my plan is to go look at every facet of this organization from 2024 and look ahead to the offseason, figure out really what they should do. So I'll look at position by position, much like I do in July. I'll look at Dan Morgan, who we're going to talk about momentarily, and talk about what he did his first year, look at his draft picks, his trades, his free agent signings, all of that. Look at Dave Canales as a whole. So I'll do that with the offensive line. And looking at him, I feel like Damian Lewis has been a good player for Carolina. I think Robert Hunt's done a good job. Obviously, center, they've had a rotating cast of characters of Austin Corbett going out with injury. I think Taylor Moton's been pretty steady at right tackle. He's missed a couple games, which has been a rarity for him here in Carolina. And then Nick Ekwonu, it's been better than last year, but I don't know if it's been convincing enough for the fan base, of course, really the organization, to want to hand him that fifth-year option, exercise that come May later on this year. So we'll see how that plays out, but I'm certainly going to be looking at the offensive line. I'm going to look at the rookie pass catchers. Xavier Legette, him and Bryce Young just could not connect last week, whether it was Xavier not able to adjust to the football or Bryce just barely overthrowing him. Just the connection has not been there this season between them. And you look at Bryce, he's been able to connect with Jalen Coker. He's been able to connect with Adam Thielen, just has not been there quite yet when it comes to Xavier Legette. And we've seen even JT Sanders prior to the neck injury suffering against KC having a solid connection with Bryce. I want to see Xavier grow into that in this game, get some momentum heading into the offseason. I do not think he's going to be a number one wide receiver. I do think Carolina needs to be in the market for some veteran receivers. T. Higgins coming up this offseason. But yeah, I want to see what Jalen Coker can do. JT Sanders, who Dave Canales said last Monday, and then he said after the game that he wants to get him more involved in the offense. So it's just kind of weird. Why say that on Monday and not exercise it on Sunday? And I understand things change, but come on, man. He didn't get targeted until late in the fourth quarter, and Dan Chisena had been targeted before him, which is wild. Damani Richardson, also want to see what he can do. He's been stepping in there, taking over that role from Jordan Fuller, who's been a healthy scratch the last 2 weeks. And I would imagine that would be the case again coming up this week. Would like to see J.C. Horn back in there, being able to play 16 out of 17 games, just helping further solidify his case that he should be extended this offseason. Don't even let him play on that fifth-year option. Go ahead and extend him after this year. So I want to see how they play. But also, man, I want to see this team really show some resolve and bounce back after a bad performance. And we saw they didn't play well against Dallas. They came back. They ended Arizona's season. Then they came back and did not play well last week. So it's been a little bit of a yo-yo inconsistency, which that's what you get from a 4-12 football team, as we all should know by now. My hope is that they go out there knowing that Atlanta has to win. And yeah, not having Chuba Hubbard, it's not going to be helpful for Carolina and the run game. But the offensive line has to do a better job and give guys, like, I think maybe Mike Boone gets more of an opportunity than Raheem Blackshear. I saw Mike Kay, our friend of the Charlotte Observer, he had tweeted out prior to the game that having conversations with people, he felt like Mike Boone will receive the most carries. That did not end up being the case, but he had one successful carry when he got in there late in the game. So maybe he gets more of an opportunity on Sunday so that the Panthers can have somewhat of a rushing attack against Atlanta. So I want to see them bounce back, continue to show that character they've shown all season long, fight back and be right there in it. And hopefully, beat Atlanta, get to 5-12, and we'll see where that lands them in the draft. They'll be in the top 10 regardless. But that's what I want to see. That's what I'm looking for out of this team on Sunday when they head down to face off against the Falcons down there in Atlanta. Jerry Romero, talk a lot about him on Tuesday, providing the case for and against. David has a question about Ejiro and his future in Carolina. I'll answer that one. And then also Dan Morgan, first year as a GM here in Carolina, the hallway promotion that David Tepper gave him a year ago. How has he done? I'll tell you here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more. A FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's get back into it. The final weekly Wednesday mailbag of the 2024 regular season here on the first day of 2025. Happy New Year to all of the Locked On Panther fans and listeners out there. Thank you all for your support. Last year, reached the 10,000 subscriber mark over on YouTube. So very thankful to reach that total and hopefully get going more. Tell your friends, tell your family, anybody out there who's a Panther fan about the show. And hopefully they will also be a fan of yours truly and what we do over here on Locked On Panthers. David now has a question about Ejiro Evero. Talked about this ad nauseum throughout the season, but really yesterday spent a lot of time just putting together a case for and a case against Ejiro Evero and why he should or should not return to Carolina as defensive coordinator in 2025. And now he is under contract, so we'll see whether the Panthers want to honor that contract or if they want to move on or there's a mutual parting of ways. We'll see how that plays out, likely coming up on Monday, as that's Black Monday in the NFL, and a lot of coaches will be fired that day, head coaches, coordinators, and then we'll get a start. Now, for me, content-wise, probably would be helpful for yours truly, and I'm never going to root for someone to lose their job because it's not just going to be Ejiro Evero losing his job. It's going to be Todd Wash, who maybe because the defensive line's not played well, should not remain in Carolina. It's going to be Pete Hansen losing his job. It's going to be Tim Lukabu. It's going to be a lot of people losing their jobs here in Carolina if Ejiro Evero is not retained. So always understand that. Then there's people even below them who make far less money than these men and are not rich, who lose their opportunity in the NFL, and it's not their fault. So always remember that while the millionaire coach that you hate is losing their job, also the person who's like a quality control assistant or whatever, who's making 40 grand is also getting fired and then trying to figure out what's their next opportunity in this game that they love. So just remember that in 2025. Be kind. Let's do that. Let's let that be our resolution this year. I talked a lot about that yesterday, and David asking, Ejiro Evero is a great DC, but with injuries and a lack of talent, the actual defense hasn't lived up to the standard under him. Does he live to see another season, or do they cut ties and start more fresh? Side note, I want him to stay, but I know people that don't due to a lack of production. And, well, that's really the case. The case for Ejiro Evero that I laid out on Tuesday was, the injuries. The Panthers have had a litany of injuries the last two seasons defensively. You go all the way back to a year ago, looking at all of the defensive players that were out. There was 58 combined missed games for starters. That's guys like Shaq Thompson missing 15 games, JC Horn missing 11 games, Marquise Haynes missing 10. Then you look at this season so far, looking into Sunday and projecting, like Derek Brown's obviously not going to play, 67 missed games for starters. So Derek Brown's going to miss 16 games this year. Shaq Thompson's going to miss 13. DJ Wonnum missed 9. Dane Jackson missed 8. Jordan Fuller missed 6. And even got guys like Josie Jewell's missed 4. You got Trevor Wallace who's missed 4. So there's a lot of injuries that they've had to deal with, which has been a problem. Then he brings up the lack of talent. Brian Burns is no longer here. Frankie Lou is no longer here. Dante Jackson's no longer here. Jeremy Chin, Von Bell, Gross Matos, who helped him out last year. You brought in Clowney, who has not been better than Burns. You brought in Wonnum, who has been a nice plus for Carolina, but has not been highly graded so far in PFF, which is just one way to look at things. Ashawn Robinson has certainly been better standing as a starting defensive tackle over Deshaun Williams, who departed, but then has come back and been Carolina's second highest graded defensive lineman this year. Josie Jewell has been a step below what Frankie Louvu gave them, but he's been, I think, pretty solid since coming back after that injury against Denver last or 2 months ago now. Dane Jackson, been not good, lost his job to Shaw Smith-Wade, who's now on IR, so Dane's back out there starting again, likely on Sunday. Fuller's been inactive the last 2 weeks, losing his job to Damani Richardson. Nick Scott has actually not been too bad, but he's also not been that big of a plus, so they've dealt with that. I mean, Dave Canales, he was asked about it on Monday again. He's standing by his man. He's saying, I love the scheme. The scheme's not the problem. The problem's the players. He didn't say it. I'm saying it. A lot of you are saying it, and we all should know it. Jared's not out there blowing assignments. Jared's not out there missing tackles. Come on now. So, yes, the results are the results. And he's also going to have other options. Like he could have been the Packers DC potentially. Could have been with the Rams. Could have been in New York, which would not have been a better option in Carolina because that maybe John Morrow is actually going to keep Brian Daboll around. Maybe not. We'll see. But he had other options, and he'll have other options after this year. And I think he'll probably find a better spot if it's not here in Carolina. But the results, as you mentioned, David, like that is the issue because this is a results-oriented business. And when you go from the fourth best defense as far as total defense to dead last, you go from sixth in yards per play allowed to dead last, 14th and third down percentage defense to 30th, you're going to have problems. Red zone defense got a little bit better from 28th to 26th. Scoring defense was only 29th last year, so it wasn't like the Panthers defense was great anyways. That goes now to last. And, oh, yeah, a franchise worse, 496 points allowed. And if they give up 38 on Sunday, that will be the worst in the NFL. Yes, an asterisk will be placed there as they would have played 17 games, not 16 games, as the Baltimore Colts are the ones that set that with the 533 points. And looking at it, too, they have not been able to get pressure. They have not been able to stop the run at all since he's been here. And looking at the advanced analytics, they were 26 in EPA last year. They're 31st this year, 25th in DVOA last year. Now they're 31st in DVOA this year. It's not been a good defense either year. Some stats like total defense say they were good last year, but you really look at it, scoring defense, they've been bottom 5 in the league back-to-back years. And yes, injuries have been an issue, but also like the results are the results. And guys like Jeremy Chinn, Frankie Louva, who we talk about, talent leaving. Those guys have had a lot of success under Dan Quinn this past year in Washington. I recall Jeremy Chinn not being a major part of this defense last season. Why was that? When your defense is struggling, I know he missed 5 games because of a hamstring injury, but why, when he was actually healthy, was he not a bigger part of the defense when Ejiro Evero told us that he was going to be in a playmaking position? Well, he's been that this year in Washington. Frankie Louvu want to be more of a pass rusher, want to be utilized that way like Phil Snow did when he had 7.5 sacks a couple seasons ago. And then, well, last year, that's not necessarily what the case was, and Ejiro Evero didn't necessarily have him in a scheme like that. He wanted more guys who could set the edge, necessarily not guys who are going to go out there and rush the passer. Well, he's doing pretty well in Dan Quinn's scheme, isn't he? Because we saw what Dan Quinn did with Micah Parsons in Dallas. Not saying that's what he's doing in Frankie Louvu, but Louvu does have now a career-high 8 sacks this season. DJ Johnson, remember him? That was the guy that Ejiro Evero wanted to draft. Scott Fitter, blame him if you want, but that's a pick by Ejiro Evero. Look at some of the free agent signings. Nick Scott hasn't really done anything. Jordan Fuller, he's been on IR for a lot, but also he's been healthy scratch the last couple of weeks. You look at Joseph Jewell's been fine. I think Richardson or A'Shawn Robinson's been fine, but some of those guys in that secondary, those are guys that Gerald wanted, and they have not been the better of the free agent signings that the Carolina Panthers had this past year. So there's the case for and against. Go listen back to yesterday's show to hear the full case for and against Ejiro Evero, and also my verdict as I gave that. So go listen back to that. But appreciate the question there, David, and want to give you all a short synopsis of some of the things I talked about on yesterday's show. Now, Jake, speaking of free agents and signing to Carolina, he said, is Dan Morgan giving us hope for the moves he has made thus far? Will he make a major push for defensive players in free agency and the draft? Looking back, I'm going to do a total comprehensive episode about Dan Morgan, what he's done so far in Carolina as the GM, looking back at his first year, looking at his free agency moves, his trades, his draft picks. You look at free agency just right now, like Robert Hunt, $100 million has been well worth it so far. Maybe not could be a Pro Bowler, but a solid player. I think Damian Lewis has come in and played well. You look at guys like Dane Jackson, that didn't work out. Dane was hurt, lost his job to Mike Jackson, and then lost his job to Shaw Smith-Wade. DJ Wonnum, I think, actually could be a good player for them. Now I got to bring him back next year, which I think they will do. Caleb on Chason never made the team. Josh Nyman. Brady Christian's been utilized more than him. I guess he's more of a right tackle. As we saw, he did start on Sunday. I thought maybe Brady would get to start, but they stuck up Josh out there. I wonder whether he'll be back as a swing tackle again next year. If they don't bring back Brady, they kind of need to. Clowney, well, I told y'all what that was going to be, and it's been exactly what I thought it was going to be. He's not really doing all that much. He's a nice name, though. Nice to have him back home. But come on. Draft picks, though, like we get trading up to the first round. In the moment, I hated it. It didn't really make a lot of sense to me. And people were like, oh, it's fifth-year options. Like, okay, cool. but the guy's going to be good enough to have the fifth-year option exercise. We've seen Derek Brown be good enough. We've seen Brian Burns be good enough. J.C. Horn be good enough. Has Ike Ekwonu been good enough? I don't think so. And has Xavier Legette so far been good enough? No, but he's got 2 more seasons to show it, and we'll see. He's not going to be a number 1 receiver. I don't see that happening. He's not going to get 5 years like in Columbia to finally figure it out. So he's got to start to step up, because I think Carolina should go out there and get some better players and guys who can come and take his job. You got to earn things in the NFL. I don't give a crap if you're drafting the first round. Second round talent taken in the first round. And he was an undrafted talent heading into last season at South Carolina, who now ended up being a first-round talent. But he has not lived up to whatever hype people had for him. I certainly didn't have high expectations. I thought he would be better than what Mingo was, because he at least produced in the SEC, and he has been better than what Jonathan Mingo gave them. But I do not think he's ever going to be a number 1 in Carolina. Jonathan Brooks, who knows whether he's ever going to have success, because he has those 2 ACL tears in 13-month span. That sucks for him in that same right knee. Trevin Wallace has been solid, unfortunately, after the season with a shoulder injury. JT Sanders has been able to start basically all season long, so love that. Shaw Smith-Wade was able to come in there and take a job like that. Jaden Crumedy got combined for his first half a sack on Sunday, so we'll see how he develops. Of course, Michael Barrett was traded away in efforts to go and get Deontay Johnson. To go get Mike Jackson. That stems from the Deontay Johnson trade. So Michael Barrett, whatever, he's gone. But that brought in Mike Jackson, who started and played in every single game this year. It has been, I think, a fairly solid corner, not a top tier, league average, which is fine. And you look at some of the UDFAs. Jalen Coker, clearly a future for him. Damani Richardson, clearly a future for him in Carolina. Like, those are some positive things that Dan Morgan has done. So I do think that Dan Morgan has made some solid moves, more so than bad moves so far. And I think he will make a push for some defensive players, free agency, and the draft. But he also should be making a push for some offensive players, as there are questions at receiver, O-line, and at running back, really every area of the offense. Quarterback too, I suppose, as far as who's going to be backup for Bryce next year. So that has to be addressed as well. And I feel good about what Dan's done so far, especially considering he was a part of Scott Fitter's regime, and that did not really go well here in Carolina, and that is saying it lightly. Okay, let's take one more quick pause here, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about potentially Steve Smith and Luke Kuechly going into the Hall of Fame at the same time here in just a moment on Locked on Panthers. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action. That's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like passing yards or rushing touchdowns. And for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money, you can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. Here's a special offer for Locked On Panther listeners. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's PrizePicks. Run your game. And download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. One more question here on this final weekly Wednesday mailbag of the 2024 season. And thank you to everybody who has sent in mailbag questions throughout the season. It's very nice. I have long days on Tuesday, full-time working over at NASCAR. Got to be in the office all day, then come here after work on Tuesday nights and record the show. So appreciate everybody sending in questions. Really makes it easy for me to come in, get your questions, really react to them. I think there's been a lot of good questions, and let's continue that throughout the off season on Fridays. Send in good questions, whether it's only 3 questions I get. Really would like to expand on them. If I get 10, like, try and answer all of them, but still sending questions, always try to answer them, even if I don't get them on the show. So appreciate every single one of you for sending in questions. And Kurt always sends in some pretty thoughtful questions for me and from him. And he says right here, with Smitty and Luke, that's Steve Smith Sr. and Luke Kuechly, which I'd imagine you would know, making the final 15 for Hall of Fame voting. If on the off chance they somehow, some way got inducted together, where would that and the actual induction day in August rank in Panthers history? Would that be the greatest day ever for the franchise? I would say right now, the greatest day ever for the franchise was when they just put it on Arizona back in, I guess technically 2016, but 2015 season in the NFC Championship game. I don't think there could be a better day than that, other than when, well, they went to Philadelphia and Ricky Manning Jr. had 3 interceptions in that game. That would be the other game I would look at. X-Clown in St. Louis that day. That would be one of those games. Hell, man. I mean, Hickson getting that touchdown from Cam against New Orleans and Carolina really being back, like, in finally showing, okay, this is a contending team moving forward. That was a great day. Julius Peppers going into the Hall of Fame this past year. That was a great day. But yeah, if Smitty and Luke go in together, the second 2 homegrown Carolina Panthers, just like of course Pep was. Of course, you know, Steve's played up there in Baltimore for a little bit. That does not change anything. He still lives here. He's a Panther. I don't think he's that attached to the Ravens organization. Of course, has relationships there. His head coach, still the head coach there. Of course, Luke, he still lives in Charlotte. Only played for Carolina those 8 seasons. He was excellent. I mean, that would be phenomenal. I think that would go right there behind the 2 NFC title winning games and going to the Super Bowl. I think that those 2 would be right there. And I do wonder if it's going to happen. Like Steve Smith, I think he should get in this year. He's going to get in. Like, both of them are going to be in the Hall of Fame. It's just a matter of the politics of making them wait. So with Steve, he's already had to wait so far, but he's a 5-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro, comeback player of the year. He's 8th in receiving yards in the history of the game. Everyone ahead of him right now is in Canton. There are players behind him. Now, some of those players played in a different era. 2 of them did not. Andre Johnson, Marvin Harrison, both played in the same era as Steve Smith Sr., and they're behind him in total yards receiving-wise in the history of the NFL. So he's getting in. I don't know whether it'll be this year, but he will get in. And let's just go ahead and put him in. If you're a Hall of Famer, put him in. Luke Kuechly, 7-time Pro Bowler, 5-time All-Pro, Defensive Player of the Year, Defensive Rookie of the Year, had a similar career to Patrick Willis, as he only played 8 seasons. Patrick Willis also only played 8 seasons, and Patrick Willis also was a 7-time Pro Bowler, 5-time All-Pro, was a DPOY, and played 8 seasons, and he just got in this past year. Now, he had to wait till his 5th year of eligibility, and it was his 2nd year as a finalist until they put him in. Maybe the voters look at, okay, Patrick, we just put him in. Same stats basically as Luke Kuechly, same accolades. Why not just go ahead and put Luke in as well and not let Luke have to sit here and wait for years and to get into Canton when he's going one day anyways? I always felt like that was weird. It's like, oh, well, you can't put him in just yet. Like, Eli Manning's up there as a finalist. There's going to be a lot of conversations of whether Eli Manning is a first ballot Hall of Famer, aside from just the Manning name. He's going in. 2-time Super Bowl MVP, took down the undefeated Patriots. It's going to happen, whether you like it or not. Whether Eli was a great quarterback in the regular season or not, you know, you become a legend for what you do in the playoffs. Terrell Davis, one of the first players I really liked when I was a kid. I don't know, when you're a kid, you're a fan of a lot of different players, whether they're on your team or not. I mean, that's a guy who really made his hay in the playoffs because of the back-to-back Super Bowls he won there in Denver, what he was able to do when it mattered the most. And that's part of the reason where people like, Phillip Rivers said they shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. Even Dan Fouts got in there, but he never won anything. There's a lot of guys throughout the history of the game that just, Dan Marino, that just were good, but just never great enough to get to some of those points to like really make it happen when it matters the most in January and now in February. So we'll see. I think Kuechly will get in. I think Luke Kuechly clears the Hall of Famer. Like, why wait? I think same thing with Steve. And it would be awesome if both those guys get in later on this year. But yeah, it's going to be behind beating the brakes off Arizona. It's going to be behind winning in Philly that day. And those are the top 2 days. And this, I think, would be the 3rd best day in franchise history. And I hope it happens. They're going to get in one day, and excited for them. Hopefully, man, I hope Cam gets in one day. Who knows what that case is going to be like? It's going to be debated for a long time. I don't think Greg's going to be a Hall of Famer, but he'll be in the Ring of Honor one day. Like, all these guys will get their their praise from this organization if they haven't already gotten it. So yeah, would it be a cool day, Kurt? And appreciate that question. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all, subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where starting next Friday, the weekly Friday mailbag is back throughout the entire offseason here on Locked On Panthers. All you got to do, again, is at me or DM me to get those questions in for the weekly Friday mailbag. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding, and I'll talk to you tomorrow for the final Crossover Thursday episode, as we'll talk to Locked On Falcons host Aaron Freeman. And, you know, we're gonna be mean here, Aaron. Not mean. We'll just tell him how the Falcons are going to blow it after they already blew it.